The three main points I would like to leave the committee with today are: one of the greatest concerns that has emerged in my research are incidents that might imperil safety, bring military or other assets together in escalatory ways, or release toxins into the environment in the Arctic. The second point is that, although there are many factors that will impact future outcomes in the Arctic, cooperation at all levels, including issues to do with geopolitics, and governance will be among the most influential. And third, mitigating capability gaps to enable safety, security, and stewardship activities will help enable U.S. governance in the Arctic, but will require investing in organizations and people, as well as in multiple types of assets and infrastructure. There is no silver technology or other bullet. The solution, whatever the specifics, will be multifaceted. I'll return to each of these points briefly in the remainder of my time. First, the importance of discrete events. One of the primary findings from the research I referred to in my written testimony was the concern of stakeholders writ large about safety, risk of escalation stemming from marginal incidents, and the containment and mitigation of environmental hazards, in addition to the immediate concern about loss of life and property, among other things. These types of events have the potential in the future to cause a chain reaction, leading to general issues of rising tensions, perhaps between stakeholders, as well as the creation or perception of a security and governance void in the Arctic region. This will naturally impact Indigenous and other local communities. It will impact the role of the U.S. Coast Guard, and it could lead to increased involvement or even assertiveness from individual Arctic stakeholders, to include Russia and China. Let me pause for a minute on Russia and China. One of the other aspects of our work has been looking at the durability of Arctic cooperation. Naturally, Russian assertiveness in the Arctic and the emergence of China as a long-term player in the region has raised questions about the durability of this cooperation, for getting ahead of governance and other issues, something I touch upon momentarily. The United States and others are right to be wary of Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic, but must be mindful of some important points. First of all, Russia and China do not have identical histories, stakes, or interests in the region. Russia's confidence in the efficacy of the protective ice barrier for its long, strategically and economically important northern rim is understandably waning. In contrast, China does not hold any territory in the Arctic. It is, of course, one of 13 Arctic Council permanent observer states, and as such has participated by the Council's rules and in the spirit of cooperation thus far. That said, the economic and military resources at China's disposal make it a very powerful stakeholder, and there is no doubt that China seeks investment and influence in the region. Whether China's near Arctic state concept will catch on with others, creating the potential for a negotiating bloc, also remains on the horizon. Returning to cooperation and governance as two important factors among many in influencing the vulnerability of the Arctic to safety and security incidents. These decisions that Arctic stakeholders make about these as a group and individually will shape activity in the Arctic and affect the resources required and available to govern that activity. This is very important for demands on the maritime transportation system and the transportation system writ large, I would argue, in the Arctic, and on the U.S. Coast Guard in terms of what the service does, when, where, how often, and in what intensity. I'll conclude by talking about the third point I raised, which is about U.S. Coast Guard capability gaps in the Arctic. And what we found in our research was that there are three main types of gaps: communications and navigation, maritime and other domain awareness, as well as response capabilities. Some specific recommendations that came out of our study included installing additional communications infrastructure. Admiral Ray talked a little bit about that earlier. Also, investing in remotely controlled air, sea, and amphibious craft for providing persistent wide area surveillance. Updating data gathering and database construction processes to enhance the role of automation. Developing operating concepts plans and investment strategies that recognize the need for both agile first response assets as well as infrastructure and logistics to sustain longer-term operations and to conduct heavy lifting. Increasing the number of forward operating locations and resources, including local and mobile elements, as well as continuing improving long-term relationships with Native communities and pre-positioning key response items in those partner communities. I'll conclude by reiterating once again that any mitigating strategy will involve a multifaceted approach, Part of good governance is being equipped to prevent and mitigate problems by making the right investments in organizations and people, as well as in multiple assets and infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tingstad. Governor Treadwell.